A world without standardized tests. A thought experiment for you. What would happen if all of a sudden standardized tests were banned from schools? How would education change? Thought experiment. Would teachers' daily instruction be different? Would teachers still be able to teach? Would students learn? How would we know if learning had occurred? How would we know which students were the struggling readers? How would we know which schools were the best schools and which schools were underperforming? Would education cease to exist? Would the education world suddenly implode from lack of data? Would there be economic chaos without a number attached to them? Would there be massive waves of identity crises among the student population? Let us define our terms. A standardized test is any published test in which there are mandatory instructions for administering and scoring. Here, it is standardized so that all the testing variables are the same. Now, usually standardized tests are norm reference, but not always. A norm reference test is any test that compares students to a normal population. All the scores are put together and distributed along the familiar bell-shaped curve. Average is established with half the population falling above and half below. The term standardized test is used here to indicate standardized norm reference tests. And again, norm reference tests compare a student's performance against the performance of their peers. Standardized tests are good for that. They can be used as one indication to indicate that there might be a reading problem. All right, one indication to indicate reading problems. It does not give us the cause of the reading problem. It essentially tells you how far away from average that student's scores fall. Now, once upon a time, there was a life before standardized tests. Hard to imagine. Growing up in a small rural town of Grantsburg, Wisconsin in the early 60s, there were no standardized tests, and yet somehow many of us managed to learn to read. Also, we did not need standardized tests to identify the struggling readers. Every kid in class who knew who these students were. They were the kids the teacher skipped over when reading our weekly readers together using round robin reading. Also, they were all put in the same group for reading instruction during the 6 years that we moved through the elementary grades together. We did not need standardized tests to identify the struggling readers. Imagine that. Standardized tests can be a useful educational tool. It is one of many tools that can and should be used to evaluate, assess, and document learning. One of many tools. But like any tools, the effectiveness of this tool is determined by how it is used. A misuse of this tool would be if it were the sole means used to determine students' placement in a program, identify strengths and weaknesses, measure students' progress, evaluate teachers' programs or methods, or diagnose the cause of a reading disability. If it were the sole tool or the sole type of tools. Hence, yet, that is what often happens with students, especially in the special education world. Standardized tests are the only tool used to do all these things, and you get a description or a picture of that student that looks like that student through a very narrow peephole. You do not get a very good picture of that student. An effective use of standardized tools would be one tool to indicate that there might be a problem and that the student might need further diagnosis. That is an effective and proper use of standardized tests. Standardized tests can be helpful in certain situations for specific purposes, but that does not mean that more standardized tests are more helpful. A pig doesn't get heavier by weighing it. There's not a standardized test in the world that has helped a student create meaning with print. You cannot standardize tests your way to literacy achievement.